Hi, so welcome everyone to season 47, year 24, week 7 of the KGB Monday Night Poetry Series, Brave New World edition. So I'm going to try to explain what's going on tonight, as this one is special. We have two magnificent poets, and hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed for the ghost of a third. The first, Terrance Hayes, needs little introduction, though of course Jason's going to give him a good one. The second, Fran Quinn, has been a secret sauce in American poetry for the last 50 years. If you mention his name to another poet, one of two things will happen. They'll say, who? Or their whole being will light up. Among those who know it, I've never observed any name to melt more ice faster than Fran Quinn's. Certain things just have a way of happening through him or being revealed through him. On the list of major poets from the second half of the 20th century that counted him as a friend and trusted him is not a short one. It stretches back in time to back when Fran was an eccentric janitor in Worcester, Massachusetts, with a really unusual knack for not only organizing poetry readings, but organizing whole communities around those readings. And that buddy list of friends has included, Heaney, Levertov, Bly, Ignato, Creeley, Lee Young Lee, Cannell, and the greatest poet in the history of Indiana, Etheridge Knight. Etheridge Knight is one of these humans, as I don't have to tell anyone here, like Hopkins or Jesus, or the Reverend Gary Davis, Sonny Chirac, who become a little more alive every year that they're dead. A work like To Float in a Space in Between, Terrance's outstanding lyric essay on night, influence, uncertainty, liquidity, is an example of Etheridge's enlarging life. So those who've read the book may have seen Fran's name in the dedication or in the anecdotes. We thought it might be fun to get both of them here on KGB while it's still on Zoom. Here's some of their poems and then get them talking about Etheridge. I've written down some questions to ask them, and then we're going to ask people to type questions in the chat. And, and then Jason is going to kind of, call out some good ones that he sees them, and we're just going to have some free flowing fun. So with that, I'm going to pass the ball to Jason, who's going to introduce Terrance.
Okay, all right. In a recent essay about how sonnets turn, or rather how they twist, I performed a close reading of a sonnet from Terrance Hayes' American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. The larger argument of the essay is that if the emergence of the sonnet in English marked the onset of what we now call modern subjectivity, changes in the sonnet mark a change in how we experience ourselves, and that this change is essentially that we were about to move to the side of modernism, that postmodernism was simply a way to seeing what was wrong with modernism without finding a new way of being, postmodernism, but that we might think of ourselves now as finding a way into something that has yet to be named, but whose traces in our poetry. In choosing Hayes as my exemplar, and particularly a sonnet from American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin, I was on very safe ground because if anyone is leading the way in American poetry, it is Terrance Hayes, and has been for a long time. When AWP was AWP, Terrance moved through it like a comet, a tale of admirers moving behind, hoping to see how to adopt his effortless style, how to move with the elegance and genius that seemed to carry him through this world and this world of letters. American Sonnets is a landmark collection, an index and guide to how we might ethically, responsibly, and joyfully find a marriage between aesthetics, politics, and lived experience, by which I mean that which hurts us and that which excites us. The sonic pyrotechnics in a Hayes poem allow it to open and open and open, yielding new layers upon each return. The imprint of Hayes' work is everywhere in American poetry, and I'm thrilled to welcome him tonight. Terrance Hayes' most recent publications include American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin, To Float in the Space Between, Drawings and Essays in Conversation with Etheridge Knight. To Float in the Space Between was winner of the Poetry Foundation's 2019 Pegasus Award for Poetry Criticism and a finalist for the 2018 National Book Critics Circle Award in Criticism. American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin won the Hurston Wright 2019 Award for Poetry, and was a finalist for the 2018 National Book Critics Circle Award in Poetry, the 2018 National Book Award in Poetry, and the 2018 T.S. Eliot Prize for Poetry, and the 2018 Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. Hayes is a professor of English at New York University. Please welcome Terrance Hayes. Oh wait, Terrance, you're muted. You have to unmute yourself. This is very awkward. I'm sorry, Terrance. This may be my fault.
Okay, we got it?
Yes.
Sounds good now? Okay, cool. Well, that was the reading. I hope everybody enjoyed it. No, it's great to be here. Thanks for that introduction. You know, I hate intros, but that was good. So thanks. I'm gonna try to get through this very fast. I have stuff that I was just thinking about. So now I need to do a screen share, y'all. Whoever's doing that. Storytelling, really. So no sonnets tonight. The pieces that I picked. One piece I have is actually from. It still says host disabled participant screen sharing. If I can get it up there for you, one of the pieces is from the book. Here we go. And then I'm gonna just see what time I have to do anything else. But most of the stuff, as I said, has sort of this. Well, when we talk about efforts, I'm sort of leading it to you to thinking about like what it means to be a storyteller inside of a poem. So some of these are doing that. So this was actually from the book. It's just every section is sort of in response to a line or a phrase of a line from his poem, The Idea of Ancestry. So this is something from line 18, just riffing inside of that. And also drawings. You know, one of the things I've been trying to do since we're stuck here in, I'm sure I got my time, in Zoom space, is just give people something to look at. You know, in the normal world, we're mostly just listening. And so I've been thinking about like, can you get people to actually read the poems too now and just see some of what's happening? That means you also see the typos that I've missed. But it just is like, you know, trying to take advantage of this sort of platform in a way that maybe we couldn't if we were just sitting, you know, in an open space. Okay. During the war, I was a member of the Corps. Our job was transporting the dead from the battlefield to the field morgue and on to the flag-covered coffins waiting at the airport. Sometimes nothing but body parts were shipped back home. Boys too small for battle fired their rifles above their heads and headstones in salute. It was an elaborate, elegiac affair for what was sometimes no more than bandages and stitches. I know because I was the resident storyteller of the Corps. Sometimes I wrote letters to the kinfolk of the dead. Everything real I covered in the oil of fiction. My yarns, fables, and folktales slid seductively into truths. I put my brothers in the Corps asleep with prayer disguised as stories. Late one night, after stories about bravery and pussy, I told the one or two men not yet asleep a story about my grandmother, whose surname was Watermaker, and whose 4 children had different fathers and different patronyms. Giambattista Washington Jr., Dolores was my mother, Lavish Rivers, middle name, Beulah Jenkins, Caesar Ray Seabrooks. A voice not far off in the darkness asked if the 4 children represented the 4 points of the weather vane. I said, hell no, that's crazy. I think the voice belonged to a newbie, a young brother poorly prepared to scavenge the carnage. Stupefied, he had not slept for the last 2 or 3 nights. He was awake, at least for the little while he was alive, for all my stories. He said sometimes I'd continue talking, mumbling the rhythm of a tale well after I'd fallen asleep. I never knew the name of my grandmother's first husband, an ash-colored man she married at 15. He never returned to our village after the war. They had no children. Later, all the fathers of her misbegotten babies vanished similarly. Soon after the second child was born, with the horn sprouting from his brow, a police car carried his father away. The elder daughter began speaking in some defunct African tongue exactly 31 days after she was born. Her father was killed in a New Jersey casino. In New Jersey, he had a wife, 2 cars, and twins. Watermaker was his mistress down south. Brother Insomniac said from the darkness, damn man, you come from a tribe of bastards. No wonder I can't believe half the shit you say. I told him the 4 children represented the 4 horsemen of our apocalypse, our religion, our opulence, our loyalty and ambition. They were our bastards raised by the maker of water alone. The horsemen were riding toward us through thoroughly covered in rain, I said, half to myself. Before I knew it, I was dreaming again of the war. I was making my way through a field of limbs and torsos with no attachments. I saw the face of Brother Asaniak in the mud beside me. Though he appeared to be asleep, he spoke the names of my grandmother's children when I kneeled to grasp him. Gian Batista, which means John the Baptist, Lavish, Beulah, Caesar Ray. Oh, I think that's it. Look, okay, so that's the first one. Let me put my window down. Can y'all hear these sirens going? All right, so that's something from the book. We can get back to that and talk. But you know, part of like just thinking about overlap or trying to get out of the sound of a sonnet is, I guess that's sort of where I am. So one of the other things I've been doing is these like all-star cards of poets. And so I thought I would, this, you know, again, sort of started with the drawings that I do of Etheridge in the float in the space between. So this, you know, everything comes from somewhere, I guess. But this is one I did for Sonia Sanchez, and maybe I'll read one more. And then I think actually I said I'm gonna see if I can show you this video that's also, anyway, we'll see. Okay, so here's Sonia Sanchez. And you'll see kind of what I'm doing with them based on these two. To be Sonia Sanchez, you must be born in Birmingham, where your mother dies when you were 1, where your grandmother dies when you are 6, where 4 Black girls die when you are 29. Your hair must stutter into the filament of your mind. To be Sonia Sanchez, you must be inexplicably resilient. Your pigtails must rest on your father's shoulder on the ride to Harlem in 1944. Your hair must be ironed into bangs of decree as you become a Black woman with a degree in political science in 1955. Your bangs must explode into an afro as you teach elementary school children while pursuing postgraduate studies in poetry in Greenwich Village. To be Sonia Sanchez, your afro must explode into inaugurations of Black studies programs in universities from California to Pennsylvania, into the lines of homecoming in 1969, triggering a wake of minds. Your hair must be made of a fiber that makes you both mother and father to twin boys and a daughter. On the cover of Shake Loose My Skin and Homegirls and Hand Grenades, your hair must be Black as Malcolm X's hair upon his return from Mecca. Writing, Does Your House Have Lions? Your hair must spiral into the locks of a mane. Writing, Wounded in the House of a Friend, your locks must become the lock of an embrace. Your locks must wind into quotation marks around lines from Gwendolyn Brooks, Louise Bogan, Toni Morrison, Lucille Clifton, and into question marks around lines of fire and defense, lines in the sand, chalk lines and headlines. Your locks must lengthen like a long American sentence punctuated by the songs of Black people. Exclamations of Blackness must explode from the filament of your mind. Actually, this one that I wanted to read, this other one is very different. So I eventually just started trying different things with these. I probably did about 15 of them, of different people. So this one is this poet from down south, Lorenzo Thomas, and I decided just to like take all of the lines from his collected poems of Lorenzo Thomas, because everything is sort of trying to develop a relationship with the work. So I was like, well, you know what? I'm just gonna put a poem together from all of his lines. This is probably my favorite one, unfortunately, of all the ones I did, because even though it's not mine. So it's a kind of a cento. So it says, broken Abecedarian Lorenzo cento, because I pretty much left them alphabetized, but I punctuated them so that you can hear something else coming up out of it. But these are his lines. Lorenzo Thomas. A hurricane is swirling in the Gulf all Americans are losing. All silence says music will follow because it is conceived as a tonal evocation. Bloodless hands glowing, can you read my gestures? Come on with the foliage. Eating your petals in the afternoon, I want it to be so fancy. Given choices standing in the street, grateful. Here is no redly opulent Cossack, no painted trinity. History is still ephemera. I'm trying to make my songs. I'd rather take flying lessons. If any man were willing to change places, I gather light. I know where I belong. It's not that I've grown blind. It was when neon was no longer available. I was born a speck of sand. John Donne would think of an island knowing I will not sleep tonight. Life's not light with the veil of dust. Love fills its absences with doubt. Morning, morning, Sunday. Night just keeps on arriving. Oh, excellent night. One person amplified, 100 only fit now. Part of it thought up in the silence. Say justice speaks so she contends with clouds of fortune. Since you are my lover, I sit erect in an ordinary chair. Sometimes I'm saying I love you. That will not make these lyrics more beautiful. The idle boys are waiting in the park. The land was there before us. There are no gospel singers. There is no place beyond the reach. The song light sparkles. The vipers advance this useless clairvoyance of to a lotus. Tonight, I count my sins. We are traveling to and forth on the sound. What shines is your black body when you are alive. You cannot sleep. You have this world and others. And then the last thing here is, see if I can get this thing up, is this other little thing again, sort of in the spirit of what I've always appreciated, in Etheridge is, it is like when you think about what makes a blues aesthetic, so much of it is just ability to kind of tell a story. So this is the last thing I'll show y'all. I think it's like 5 minutes, so we should be good here.
The African rainbow lizard. In Pompano, Black people are descendants of the African rainbow lizard. Native to Africa, the eggs of the lizard were stored in the hair of kidnapped Africans. I have no information regarding why it carries a rainbow, having seen the losses it saw on slave ships and coasts. At cookouts, a single African rainbow lizard is guaranteed to appear on the picnic table among the hot dogs, ribs, store-bought coleslaw, and canned sodas. Some African rainbow lizards possess a heightened taste in music, cinema, and art. Others have a gift for reading people. The African rainbow lizard can survive on a diet of fire ants and fireflies, pill bugs and ladybugs, houseflies, houseplants, and Mother's Day flowers. Some Black working middle-class parents work too much to attend the games and performances of their Black working middle-class children. At night, the parents are exhausted and temperamental. Pepper and salt shakes from them like sweat. They work themselves to death, naturally. In Pompano Beach, I saw folk Black as beetles, and I saw a Black child place a beetle in his mouth. I saw roaches large as matchboxes. I saw Black folk cuss and joke with smoke in the mouth. Agama, agama, I heard them whisper, agama, agama, the African rainbow lizard. Outside of Pompano, about a mile from the sea, where the annual African Rainbow Lizard Convention convenes, an actual African rainbow lizard has never been seen. A number of elderly Black folk and their grandchildren attend. No one is allowed to mention the African rainbow lizard when the annual African Rainbow Lizard Convention convenes. Instead, the elderly Black folk tell fish fables. The largest and most powerful African rainbow lizard are often cannibalistic, devouring their young, according to page 174 of V.A. Harris's 1964 is the life of the rainbow lizard. The African rainbow lizard often runs a small business. The mother runs a hair salon out of the house. The father runs a fish market. When he drives Black Pompano in his beat-up pickup, coming and going, someone shouts his name. Fish guts slush in the buckets, fish guts gust in the air with disgust. But men cheer him on when he drives the Black streets. Women wear hair elaborately weaved, pressed, and styled by the mother. African rainbow lizards do not have white people for bosses. To witness the sad and beautiful changes in our family is just about reason enough to live. I was not an African rainbow lizard. Their cousin wasn't my father. None of their blood was in me. Each summer I lived fearing this would be revealed. If a lizard can talk, it is guaranteed to sing beautifully. I saw someone stumbling in the doorway, No, two men hugging, tussling, breathing. The mother was screaming, Agama, Agama. The father's tongue was like the forked, vicious tongue of the African rainbow lizard. He seemed to be trying to bite into the neck of his son, kiss him, lick him. I might have slept through the scene, overhearing a dream, not the mother screaming as she bites her lip and wields a knife at the son, or perhaps the father, not the mother, but several of the daughters screaming, Mama, Mama, but it sounded like Agama. Or they are joking how the father died clenching a nickel, a bundle of $200 or $320 bills in his church sock drawer, another bundle of teens and 20s, another bundle of 10s or 20s probably under his deathbed or pillow, a couple pounds of mason jars filled with coins in his closet, the little quarter-ounce nugget of silver he found when digging the grave of his father tucked safely in his mouth, all of it stinking like the guts of fish. The clothes washed twice a day, twice a week, and stinking still. The socks balled tight in his drawer beside the money, and the pistol stunk of fish. The scales of several varieties of fish were under his bed and nails. Tiny, greasy, granular scales glimmered in his hair. His pillow stunk of fish. The mother worked herself to death. The father died with his fist balled so tightly, no one could say whether it was money or scales he clenched.
All right, y'all. Looking forward to what Fran gonna do for us in the conversation, but that's what I got for you. Thanks.
I've allowed you to unmute yourself if you want to clap.
Thank you.
Matt, are we taking a break or should I do the fundraising part now?
Why don't you do the fundraising part? I'm gonna go visit little fella's room, and I'll be back in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Why am I vocalizing that?
And now it's recorded for posterity. So I'm putting the link for the Fundly website into the chat, and I will now share my screen and show you the, so can everyone see the Fundly website with the literary landmark KGB bar NYC? Because we are, in fact, the KGB bar is a real place. It's been a literary landmark for decades. This series has been going on for a little over 22 years. And if you'd like to make a donation, because as you can imagine, since it's great that we can be here together on Zoom, and this is the KGB bar Zoom, no one's there. No one's buying drinks, no one's tipping the bartenders, no one's going in and out. And it's really hard for a bar. And so if you'd like to support them in a way that will come back to give you a gift, if you give it the $15 level, you will have 2 drinks waiting when they reopen, and a $4 tip will go straight to the employees. And then these levels go all the way up with each one. It's kind of like NPR. I'm sort of your NPR host, but unlike, do you remember like when I was a kid, like PBS like wouldn't go back to the show until you gave enough money? They'd be like, no, you're not getting back to Doctor Who until we raise $10,000. We don't do that. But we do ask that, whatever you would have spent on a drink or whatever, if you could make that donation tonight. And we always like to point out that this goes all the way up to $50,000. And while I suspect that most of the people who are going to poetry readings don't have $50,000 in their bank accounts to contribute to the KGB bar, if you do, you get a $45,000 bar tab. So we're hoping that someone will give the $50,000, and then when we go back in to KGB, we'll have someone will be buying us drinks.
Yeah,
on their 45.
We've done a few dozen of these so far online, and still nobody has done the $50,000 investment. So maybe somebody tonight. But if not, at least the 15. But yeah, if you think about it, a $50,000 gift for $45,000 worth of drinks is quite the deal. It's just a question of, you know, are you sharing? I don't know how expensive is Russian beer. But thank you everybody, for supporting them. I know that they're open only just 1 or 2 days a week now that New York City restaurants are open again, just like 25% capacity. And you guys have all, been there. It's a really tiny bar, so I don't know how much that's helping. But we're hoping to be back in the fall, but we don't know obviously for sure yet.
Yeah, and if you'd rather just kind of make a donation through Venmo, just kind of pick whatever it is that you want to. You don't want to feel constrained by all these levels. Here's the Venmo code. You can just hold your phone up to the computer, and this link will take you right to Venmo, and you can make a donation that way. Okay.
Great.
Has everyone had a chance to refresh their drink? To take care of all their business? All right, then let's jump into the second half of the reading. Oh, one more thing. On March 8th, we have our once per season open mic. And if you would like to read in the once per season open mic, you get 3 minutes to read, and we vote. You get to score it slam poetry style, but everyone's a judge. And the winner of the evening's open mic gets to attach themselves to one reading next season. So had you won last season, you would have had the chance to put yourself on this bill. So if you would like to participate in the open mic on March 8th, just go ahead and private message me, or private message Matt or Jada or John. We're the curators. And just give us your name and your email and say that you'd like to participate in the March 8th open mic, and you will be signed up. And the link that you used to come to this event tonight will work for the entire season. So we're here every Monday night. What next week is Natasha Saye, and I'm blanking on who she's reading with. I'll look that up and then I'll get back to you.
Donna Harvey.
Yes, Harvey.
Donna Harvey.
Sorry. Thanks. Okay, and Matt, take us back.
All right. Some clicks and snaps for well, those are the same thing. Some little Zoom noises for Terrance. So Fran Quinn is a poet unique for the fact that he identifies in no small part as a poetry teacher. Robert Bly once called him America's best poetry teacher, and best implies comparison. Fran relates to all other poetry teachers almost in the way Mr. Miyagi relates to all other karate teachers. Fran's techniques simply don't resemble anyone else's techniques. At Butler a long time ago, where I was lucky enough to have Fran, I found him to be a lot like a great coach, in that great coaches coach no two players the same way. And also, like a great coach, Fran was willing to tell you things that don't necessarily make you feel good in the moment, but you're ultimately very glad to have been told, because it makes you better at the thing you care about getting better at. I don't know how Fran is doing it now, but he began us years ago by passing around these big mimeograph sheets with poems going all different directions on them. And he didn't even ask us our names. He just sat there with this crazy twinkle in his eye and went around the room and made everyone one at a time try to read Gwendolyn Brooks' The Pool Players out loud. And we had all met this poem in literature classes, but this wasn't a literature class. And so this was our simple task, to try to read Gwendolyn Brooks' The Pool Players out loud, and we all fell off the bike. Not even close. That's what he said to me. He was, kind of gently helping us as a group, but as shocking as it may be to you, a group of white people in Indiana in the year 2001 failed to feel that you have to rest on the one downbeat in, every line after the first in that poem. Fran's point was that we had been reading poems in literature classes and we didn't even know how to hear a poem up off the page. Then he, gave the poem to us with its right rhythm, and the poem sounded the way that it should sound. To give people an experience of failure as an introduction to poetry and have them come away loving it, that's what Fran was able to do. Another poem in that packet was Etheridge's Feeling Fucked Up, with all those beautiful F-bombs. Fuck red ripe tomatoes. Wonderful line to murmur to yourself in the grocery store if you're looking to make friends. But all of us who were attracted to that poem soon learned that Fran's friend Etheridge was buried just down the street over at Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis, and that Butler had Etheridge's papers, and that if anyone ever wanted Fran's help in changing the positions of the graves of Etheridge Knight and James Whitcomb Riley, the poet who's buried at the day by classification, his obsession is as a poet is breaking lines to create these microtonal changes as the voice moves through a poem. His great subjects are the seasons and love, transforming power of love, transforming power of the seasons. And his line at the end of a short poem on spring, so much has happened that we didn't do, is my single favorite line on spring. I'm not going to read his bio. I love introductions, obviously, but I don't like bios except the parts where, they talk about the strangest jobs the poets have done. And Fran's is like as good as maybe anybody's but Dorian Laux's. And he was once worked as a veterinary anesthesiologist, and he is Fran Quinn, and we're so happy to have him at KGB finally.
Now I've got to live up to that. Okay. Well, this is for me a celebration of a miracle. The miracle of Terrance and I meeting 33 years ago, and me trying to, for those of you who have a little Christian background, recognize that somebody should get crucified here tonight, and I'll try not to make it me. But in the process, let's go there, because Terrance was in the class before I came to Butler, in a class down in South Carolina. I was shocked that I was going to be there, or that I was there. And that ended up being primarily because of the fact that this dancer who would come to the Mother Conference came and decided that myself, a poet from, a sitar player from the Mother Conference, and herself would go down to Terrance's school, and we would spend a whole week there. Terrance became noticeable to me by keep appearing in the several classes that I showed up, and I figured, okay, here's a guy who's interested in poetry. And I found out he was, when one of his teachers showed me some of his poems, and then we talked a little bit. But also part of it is, so I recommend it to Terrance as the book To Float in the Space Between sort of indicates that he come up to Indianapolis and meet Etheridge. So let me start off with a poem that sort of introduces Indianapolis to people. But before you get there, just to keep life, lively and quick here, is to go to the poems almost requires a little reference here. And the reference is Blake's London, okay? William Blake, 19th century, talking about his city, and the consequences. And so here's his poem, London. I wandered through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, each blackening church appalls, and the helpless soldiers sigh, runs in blood down palace walls. But most, so midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlots curse, blast the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. It's one of those poems that knock your socks off. And it became important because they brought a bunch of Blake's paintings to the Indianapolis Art Museum, and then asked me to write a poem about it. I was way off in the beginning, but it took me a while, and under proper tutelage and beatings, I would say, by people getting me to stop just finding fault with the city, because that's what that poem does, and getting back to a certain mea culpa of my own here. This is a poem that I wrote called Indianapolis, and it was introduced. It was the place that was going to make the meeting between Terrance and I happen. And so I wanted it to be recorded there. It is so cold today. No one runs past my house to shave off a pound or two of last year's fat. They cherished each ounce as a coating for the aching bones. It is late January, whose two-faced God looks to both the past and the future. And it seems right to me to worship anyone who gets me beyond the misery of the present. Then a wisp of steam comes out of my neighbor's dryer duct. It rubs against my windows like a ghost that wants in, and I begin to pity steam and half think I'll open up for him. When the next ghost rises, and I swear I see a face I seem to know, and am startled to recognize Mad Willie Blake, Prince of the Eternal Present, come to check out our chartered streets. But no one in this city is mad enough to be out on a day like this. Only ghosts like you, I tell them. Maybe if you wander Indiana Ave, where you can find some of those brothers of jazz or fathers of the blues, we destroyed their haunts, but they're still there, just as in the old days, little praised and little honored, but persistent. Or some gust will carry you like Jesus to the top of the State House dome, where D.C. Stevenson might offer you his kingdom of the Klan for just a genuflection. Then, as if propelled by Blake's own voice, it is I who am transported to the Wheeler mission, where men who look like ghosts, women barely alive, vie for a meal. They were out all night. My heart sinks as I hear old Willie whisper, marks of weakness, marks of woe. And I remember those jazzmen hammering out the manacles our mind had forged, and those blues riffs that formed from the cold their own long lines. But it was only when Blake's ghost refused to enter my house and took his place among the poor that I saw on the window pane a halo of ice, around my breath, as if the cold itself were the holy place. It's part of the agony that and the joy of knowing Etheridge, and of the way in which, Blacks are treated as badly in this city as they are in most American cities, and that I had the the joy of meeting him and then the joy of meeting Terrance too, and that would go on. It doesn't have to happen the way we want it to happen. It happens the way it's going to happen. So Terrance didn't come up that time. He didn't come up, and he never got a chance to really meet Etheridge, because by the time he decided he might be able to come up, Etheridge had died, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. But there's one place anybody can meet Etheridge, and that's in his poetry. That is his poetry. That's where the question about life and death just continues on. The place in which what happens between, the lines, the person who write them, and the continuation of everybody's lives thereafter is totally unmanageable. And you just put up with it because that's the nature of what this is. So part of it is recognizing the fact that the darkness is all around us, as Bill Stafford says. The darkness around us is deep, he says. But also recognizing that part of the job of writing poetry is not just presenting the happy side of things. It's not that you can't be happy in a poem, but it's important to get there. Here's a poem called Cup of Darkness that I wrote. Cup of darkness. It has already been poured, and no matter how we try to lighten it, it remains dark. At the moment of creation, it was here. Since then, it's been poured over and over. For years, we have tried to escape it, but our job will not be complete until we hold it in our hand and taste its bitterness. Once we take it in, our taste buds change, and we understand a new meaning in night, a new meaning to grief. We know the reason for the stars and the face of God in the open grave. We distrust pure light, its sticky sweetness. I readjusted the next poem today. I keep going back and forth on it. Nice thing about not publishing poems for a while is you get to keep flipping back and forth no matter what happens, And so I tried it out as an I, and I tried it out as a you, and today I've decided you, but it's not the you of accusation, like you did this, it is the you that stands for the I, that is part of the I. Talking to yourself is almost with some advice you need for yourself. And it's against fame, is what it's called, a personal blank sonnet. Fame reaches into the darkest corners and will not let you die in eternity's insomnia, and almost as gratifying as it. Locked in this world, you cannot enter heaven. The beatific vision denied, you have no rest, just a constant digging in your grave to project upon you anything the next age wants to see. Chapped lips pressed against your reliquary plead for a union, a benison, an improvement to their life not earned. The grave stench uniting with the future's halitosis produced by one with no stomach for this world. So live your life as well as you can, with no specialness at all, and hope your gravestone provokes one word. Who? But then I think I've been gifted to be able to say I'm getting pretty close to that. But I find that with Terrance working me into his book and a couple of things like that, I might have slipped in that process, and am now at least going to go down in literary history as a footnote. So I'll keep that in mind and get even with them later. But that pump started in late January, so I wanted to do one in February to sort of keep moving a little bit, seeing that Matt was so interesting in letting me know I was a nature poet. I figure, okay, I'll do that, So here we go. It's called And Yet, early February, Indianapolis, Indiana. The gray snow's still here and the wind bellows through a bleak sky. Yet why does everything they contrived, the snow and the wind that is, they contrived me, excuse me, the gray snow still here and the wind bellows through the bleak sky. Yet why should everything they convinced me are of all winter long seem so false now? No leaf breaks through the bark, no bud rebels against the brown earth, and yet my feet tingle with the promises that cuts right through my boot soles. All day I have thought of the graveyards of Clinton, Massachusetts, where I was born, under 4 feet of snow, as if those headstones were finally giving off light 1,000 miles away, as if the wind moving among them, humming a chant in a language so ancient only my body understands. My body in the snow, that is. To me, my body in the snow, the dead make reply. Oh, gorgeous, the choir, the chorus, now of the snow, of the wind, of the dead's recitative, too old for Latin, too melodic for Greek, too deep for Sanskrit, using words only Lorca heard in Vermont. Each word an arrow dipped in the sugars of light flying straight from the immaculate heart of winter. Now grace filled the landscape, and I saw anew the gray snow, the earth, the brown and dormant one. Even the bleak sky seems his hand folded over all of us. Almost spring. Almost spring. Almost the face of it, as if under the snow, the almost of it looks at us, presents a white blankness. Yet 2 inches below that, maybe 6, the white blueness of snow, its softer, more telling look. Then 2 more inches below that, where the snow has given up to the sun and dribbled down, giving the hard earth its notice that it must soon be soft and pliable to the fact of flowers. First, melted snow named, then the anemone, then the egocentric narcissi, and the lovers, tulip to tulip, discovering others, and the face of spring complete. Can't you almost see it in early March? Can't you welcome it in the Lenten light, sinking over the horizon, but staring out later and later? And you know that soon the brazen sun, not a ray's width of shame, will hold back the dark, and the moon's cold face will be giving way to this hot and sweaty nights. Those stars clicking now against the frosted limbs will learn to hum among among the leaves, easy, floating, and temporal as the March snow. The sun. The sun is wearing a path across the sky. The earth has been following in its groove for years. Sooner rather than later, it will be wearing all the way through. And on the other side of daylight, we will see the faces looking back, their bright eyes twinkling, the smiles, the laughter, the men and women, the face of God and the hands reaching down, picking us up like gold, like grain, like dust. The wonder of us, the wonder breathed into us. So where are we time-wise? Am I watching to make sure I'm not going way overboard here? Oh, I still got, good. Still got 2 minutes and a half here. We're okay, you know. Just for a second. I sit and wonder, just for a second, wonder about the movement of sound across the page, across the paper, the flow of ink, the fevered brow of Mozart transcribing his last work, sweat pouring out of him, out of the second he was hearing from some light, some vision, something that was both right there in the room and so far beyond only a fever could capture it. Pure sound, pure light, pure offering. Both the signature of himself and the signature he did not recognize. The sound, the light, the grave opening to the light filling the grave, the sound clothed in silence, the grave speaking forever, the chapter, the verse, the voice, pure sound, pure light, pure grave. Not earth, not headstone, but the earth, the location, the vibration that will not stop, that can't be found except in the place without place, where nothing stops and each second starts, first with wonder, ends with sitting, must finally be I. Thank you.
What is that last one called?
Just for a second.
Did you write that on the ferry ride over here? Or have you been working that one for a while?
It's been around. I keep messing around with it, of course, like even that poem that went to the U today, as I say, there's real advantages of not publishing,
Absolutely.
It keeps you fluid as hell as long as you want to.
Hey, leave a poem on its side and it just gets better. Just every little jostling of it.
Well, who knows? Who knows whether it gets better, but it gets so that I like it, at least for the moment, to say it this way or that,
Definitely. Definitely. Well, thank you to both poets. Why don't we take a brief break and then we'll start talking about Etheridge. How's that sound?
That was great, Fran.
That was great.
Lorca? What was that line? Lorca thought of in Vermont?
Yeah, yeah, he goes up to, when he's over in the United States.
I'm thinking about Lorca in Vermont. That's so high.
Little footnote there for the world.
It's great. It's great. Okay, cool. How long you say?
Like 5 minutes, 10
Five.
minutes, 5 to 10.
Five. Let's say 5.
Okay.
If you say 5, people might take 7. But if you say 10, people will take 12.
Eleanor Wilner. I just saw Eleanor down there.
No, and Eleanor, you can unmute yourself. Everyone can unmute yourself if you want to talk. Jump in. We have an all-star audience tonight.
I'm better muted. Terrance.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll see you in a little bit. You look great, Eleanor. It's good to see you. I love that hair. It's always like
Good to see you and hear you.
so pretty. Yeah, it's great. Okay, I'll see y'all soon.
And if you want to sign up for the open mic on March 8th, you can text me. I've been told that there's been a problem with Venmo. That my security settings are different, so I don't need the last 4 digits to make a payment to Venmo. But if you're having that problem with Venmo, if you need the phone number, we're not able to get it right now. But if you give through Fundly, you can set whatever you want. I mean, it says the lowest giving level is 15, but if you can give 10, you can give 5. Anything is welcome.
And again, a plug for our open mic. It's a really great event. Past winners have attached themselves to bills with, Mark Doty, I don't know, Billy Collins. Do you remember any other ones, Jason?
Don, I'm trying to. Don, we have winners with us. Don,
Yeah.
who did you book yourself with?
Don was with Mark.
Oh, okay.
Chelsea, who did Chelsea read with? Billy Collins and
You showed me the poem.
George Green.
George Green, yeah. But we've done it like 10 times, so you'd think we'd remember more.
You think we would remember, but Jada, do you remember any of the winners and who they booked themselves with?
George Green is wonderful.
Yeah.
Byron's Foot is a great poem.
Yes.
Yeah, going back through the list, I'm sure we could figure it out, but it's kind of a neat thing to be able to do anyway. So definitely think about signing up. It's usually just kind of fun for its own sake too.
And we're very friendly.
Mhm.
We're a warm, supportive, loving audience.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so then I'm just going to go through and send love to everyone who I see who needs love. Anthony Capo, it's wonderful to have you with us. Myra Shapiro, it is so exciting to have you here. Michelle Whitaker, every day is better that you're in. Jerry Wagner is with us. Leslie Prosperman, actually, she reminded me that we read together in January and it was really fun. Eleanor Wilner, of course.
I'm looking at Catherine Barnett, Jennifer Michael Heck.
Oh, yes, they're my later screens. Karen Hildebrandt. Yeah, no, it's so exciting to have Jennifer. Are you unmuted? Can you say hi?
Hi, it's so nice to see everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
Catherine,
Great
can
to
you,
Fabulous to see
Just
you.
woke up. My family is on a completely do-it-yourself schedule. I have 2 children in remote high school, so we just sleep whenever sleep takes us. And I'm having coffee. Later, I'll work.
It's the
Wake
best.
up, work with the kids on homework at 2 o'clock in the morning whenever they're lively.
I had a job receiving trucks from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. I worked 9 to 5, but the other 9 to 5, that's kind of fun.
Right. We just let it roll. It works.
I feel like you can nap between meetings and stuff these days. It's just been a whole.
That's the thing. Yeah, they nap between classes, the schedules. The schools haven't really figured it out yet, so it's totally bizarre. But they give great assignments. I mean, the last assignment was for the kids to do an imitation of the inaugural poem, and they really analyzed her poem, and I got to sit with it longer than I would have otherwise. The schools have great assignments. It's New York City public schools, and it was deep. And we got to read the other kids' work. It was nice. Anyway, I'll let other people chat.
Do they know that the parent is a famous poet? Do they know that
A few people do. Because Emily Brandt is a young poet who's coming up, and she's a teacher there.
Oh.
And so, I've, supported her a little bit because, that there I am. And so they get to know me a little bit from that. But also my kids are just as weird as I am. So they'd have figured it out.
My mother said she was going to call me Cadwallader, but she was worried that I would not be eccentric.
Uh-huh.
So
Right.
they were like, just Jason was like a safety measure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I think you could have done it, Jason.
I don't know.
well, the thing, yeah, you get to invent yourself in any case, no matter what they give you, you invent yourself. So
we have our series regulars. We have Bruce Whitaker. We have Don Creeker. We have Sabrina. Oh, it's so great. Oh, Sarah. Sarah, do you want to unmute and say hi? Sarah Haviland is a colleague of mine, and it's great to see you here.
People are going to start using
There's a great sculpture, by the way. If you're looking, Sarah's a brilliant sculptor.
Hi there, Jason. Good to see you. And
Hi.
it's wonderful to hear these readings. And hi, Fran. John and I are both here.
Sounds great, Fran. Well done.
Terrance, it was terrific. I like your drawings.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's the only place I can share them, right? Like typically, that's not anything I can show anybody.
Fantastic.
And it's just
I love that you were showing part like actual text too, because Vijay Sasadri was doing that last week, and it led to this long conversation at the end about medium and message with respect to these kinds of poetry readings and how you can kind of like it's terrible to not be together, but then it is weird to be able to follow along with the poet as they're reading on their page or seeing art that they, it's brought up some interesting questions.
We spent a long time discussing Marshall McLuhan. Oh, sorry, go, Terrance, I interrupted.
I was saying that's how they do it in church. They make you look in the Bible while they're talking. So it seems to help. I'm just trying to be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great.
Terrance, did I miss it? Are you going to be publishing those pictures with those portrait pieces that you wrote? Those were gorgeous.
At some point, yeah. We're just in limbo. So yeah, if I get enough of something, I'll figure out something with it.
Yeah.
But it's just
they're really moving. I was really blown away by those. Those great.
Yeah, thank you.
But they're in they're in your book. The float of the
Yeah,
sea.
there's other drawings. Yeah, the first thing I read.
Right.
After tonight is the first time I tried to like just put my drawings in with stuff. So we'll see what happens.
Please.
I like your work too, Jennifer. I don't know if we've ever met before. I caught up with you with that book.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Yeah. We met once at Bowery Poetry Club. It was a busy night, a lot going on.
Here's a cool thing that you can do if you have a green screen. You can just change what's behind you and it shows. So here, let's see, yeah.
So
Terrance, you might recognize this. That's Pitt Stadium.
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember when they built that thing.
Yeah, and this is the atomic bomb dome at Hiroshima.
Yeah, Hiroshima. Yeah.
This is some of my stuff. Green screen. It's neat.
Yeah, it works a little bit even without the green screen. I had the this one for a bit. Oh shit, it's gone. Never mind. But the KGB sign. Jason's got one. Oh, he just disappeared.
Well, I know I disappeared because you can actually you can also run your video through Snapchat. And so you can have all kinds of
Oh, nice. Blue hair.
exciting.
Hey, Eleanor.
Hey, Fran. Lovely to hear you.
Thank you.
How the hell do I undo this? So as we await the return of Matthew Yeager.
we said
without my microphone on, or my face showing for minutes now. Seriously.
That explains.
Yeah. This is why I struggle at friendship. All right. So let's oh, is somebody else talking? No. Okay. We'll just, get this going. So some of these questions are going to be on kind of the poetry geek wavelength, and some of them are going to be in regard to personal experience, memories. I'm going to be just kind of handing out bouquets of flowers, of questions, and you can pick one or just throw the bouquet and do whatever you like. So, Fran, I first want to ask you how you met Etheridge, and if you could give us just kind of a general timeline of your friendship and some of the locations where it went down.
I met him at the second conference that Robert Bly ran of the Great Mother and the New Father. Brought him up, or third conference, correction. He was up at in northern Minnesota is where he was, and he came in at lunch, and Bly had him started reading, and he read for about 20 minutes, never touching a book and having everything memorized, And then from there on out, he was just sort of like a member of the group, and he was a lot of fun to sort of play with. I had heard about him a little bit ahead of time, but and people had warned me about him because he had a bad reputation, So, but he was so good at reading, I didn't care what his reputation was. So I invited him to Worcester the next year. But, so when did you run into him, Terrance?
You mean just finding him? I just found him in a Norton anthology or something.
Uh-huh.
One of those little onion paper anthologies they used to have. He had like the idea of ancestry in there, and maybe he sees through stone, and maybe hard rock. But then, I got to Pitt, and Pitt published the Essential Etheridge Night. So that meant that Ed Ochester, who was my professor, knew him, but also was sort of pushing us towards the stuff that was on Pitt. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, there was another one on Houghton Mifflin, but it was never quite as popular as that one that came out on Pitt. So just a fan, but he was like one of the first kind of contemporary poets I just came across in the anthology. I never met him though. I came to NYU. I had a basketball tournament at NYU, and I decided I didn't play that bad. I averaged about 10 points a game. I thought it was going to be great. Didn't turn out that way, but at the beginning. So it's funny to be back at NYU talking about this now.
Yeah.
So I thought I was just going to be a teacher, and I learned that pretty quick. Didn't happen either. Matt, what do you think?
So what happened in when you had Etheridge into Worcester for the first time?
He read with June. Oh God, what was her name? I lost her last name.
June Jordan? Did you meet with June Jordan up there?
June Jordan.
Wow.
The two of them read together, and June went first, and Etheridge was drunk out of his fucking mind down in the front seat, and so halfway through June's reading, you just heard he had fallen totally asleep and was snoring louder than you possibly could. I kept nudging him like this, and he would wake up, and June kept reading regardless. She was a great trooper on this whole thing, and then he would drift off again and start snoring, and I'd have to give him another, belt in the side. And finally, his time came to reading, and I'm thinking, this is going to be one of the worst readings in captivity. And he sort of went to the stage, and there was this set of stairs, maybe 6 or 7 steps up to the stage itself. And he did it okay. He was again, slowly but surely coming out, but he didn't quite make the last stair, and he fell flat on his face on the stage. And then I'm going, oh God, this is impossible. And what he did was he slowly but surely drew himself up, stood, looked around at the audience and then started reciting. And once he got into the recitation of the poems, he was as sober as you've ever heard anybody be sober. And he gave an incredible reading, came down off of the stage, and while everybody was applauding, passed out again in the audience. So that's my first big move, getting Etheridge readings, so it's sort of memorable.
Yeah, I had never heard that story. Had anybody heard that story? Oh my goodness. So I had a question. You once said at Butler to me, and I initially thought that poetry readings were just all, I don't know, agonistic contests. And you said, poetry readings aren't contests, but Etheridge always won. So I want to ask, like, how much of his ability to slay an audience was because he was a great reader, and how much was because the poems were uniquely great when they're read out loud? Because we've read poems out of his out loud in classrooms, and I have observed him win poetry readings that he wasn't even present at.
Do that last.
Yeah, that wasn't
you get.
You just want to discard that. But the real question, how much of it was him? How much of it was the poems?
Oh, well, Terrance's book tells you most about what the latter part of it. Terrance, take over, babe.
Trying to see if I got him around here somewhere. Yeah, here we go.
Feeling fucked up. Lord, she's gone, done left me, done packed up and split, and I with no way to make her come back, and everywhere the world is bare, bright bone white crystal sand glistens. Dope, death, dead, dying, and jiving drove her away, made her take her laughter and her smiles and her softness and her midnight sighs. Fuck Coltrane and music and clouds drifting in the sky. Fuck the sea and trees and the sky and birds and alligators and all the animals that roam the earth. Fuck Marx and Mao, fuck Fidel and Nkrumah and democracy and communism. Fuck smack and pot and red ripe tomatoes. Fuck Joseph, fuck Mary, fuck God, Jesus and all the disciples. Fuck Fanon, Nixon and Malcolm, fuck the revolution, fuck freedom, fuck the whole motherfucking thing. All I want now is my woman back so my soul can sing.
Cool. Did y'all hear that?
Yeah.
That answers the question, doesn't it? I mean, even the way he says that title is poetry. Feeling fucked up. I mean, I just love the way he even just delivers the title of the poem. But yeah, I mean, there you go. There's your answer.
I love what he does with the pitch on the last word of that poem with sing. I mean, that oh, that was lovely.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he was as much able to deliver it as write it. I mean, obviously that inflection, all the things he's doing tonally through that is part of why you just want to play it, that you can't quite do it, the difference between what's a scored poem and what's a poem, he does bring something extra to it.
That scored thing is interesting. So I want to, parachute into poetry nerd country. And so, Etheridge is he's famous for those slashes. And there's a recording of him reciting the idea of ancestry on YouTube. That's the poem that gives the last line is the title to Terrance's books, as we all know. And if you listen, not even that hard, you can hear him like on those slashes, just drawing breath in. And and that was the first poem of his that I know that had the slashes, and is the only one in poems in prison. And then he does all kinds of things with those slashes in the future throughout his work. And I was wondering if both of you wanted to kind of speak to what he gets out of those slashes in poems, and also can one use the slash without kind of conjuring Etheridge?
Fran, you want me to say something?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, there's 4 million things you can say about that. First of all, it has been used by any number of people besides Etheridge. Uh, Sean McRae is using it presently. He juxtaposes against all kinds of things. So I mean, it's out there, and it's associated, in my mind, it's associated with the early, poetry of Black poetry of the 60s. That's where it's associated with. I don't know, maybe might know more about it than I do, Terrance.
I mean, obviously, I've taught a little bit of Etheridge and thought about him over the years. I just think like he's so great because of the line between craft and craftiness. Like once you say he was a bullshitter and a hustler, that makes sense both for the way he made poems, but it also means he's a little bit resistant to like really close readings sometimes. I mean, sometimes those slashes are working, and sometimes I think he's just seasoning things with them, And I say that based on my sense of him as a kind of, again, the trickster, crafty craftsman kind of thing. So some of it is just maybe interesting to him. One of the things about the end of that poem is deciding to change it, whether it's going to be children. I have no children, no sons to float into space. So I think he was just very fluid with what he was doing poetically, which is, I think, super useful to think about. It's why he was in all these circles. He was married to Sonia. So he's a black arts poet, he's a blues poet, he's a deep image poet. And I just find part of that's because he was a hustler. And part of that is just like, that's a really good lesson for poets, like what part of a hustler should be in all of us, which is like, wherever you can get it, that's where you go. Wherever the poets are, that's where you go. That's the depth of your, to me, solidarity. It's not really anything else except for the other poets. And I think that's what he was. That's why he happened to have married a poet, like I think, yeah, so crafty, who knows what he was doing. He was such a great bullshitter. It just resists a lot of close reading sometimes, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, you can't separate bullshit from Etheridge no matter how you do. That's part of the man,
That's useful. It's useful information, I think, because it's still a certain kind of integrity and faithfulness to poetry while also being a bullshitter, I think there's some usefulness to not all of it, obviously, but some of it that approaches a kind of generosity, which is like, I'll take everything. I'll take whatever you're offering. I think that could be seen as a really good skill for a poet to possess.
And also he rejuggles everything you want to say about bullshitters.
Mm-hmm.
He did at the time. It wasn't like as if he was separating any of those things. He literally was the greatest bullshitter. And could you trust him? Geez, yes and no, And yet you learned so much from the man. I can't imagine, my whole life would have changed if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for knowing him.
What did you learn specifically from him, Fran?
Ooh, the list goes on. But he brought a new dimension to oral poetry, absolutely. And he would walk into a bar, he would take over a bar, the whole Free People's Poetry Workshop movement about going out to a bar and making things happen down there and mixing not only people with the bar culture, but taking people from the higher class and bringing them down there and mixing them, because he would invite, like Galway Canal or Bly to the bar if they were anywhere near the place. He would mix cultures like you could not believe, reshuffle the entire deck of what you had. So you didn't walk out if you were paying any attention to what that man did. And it's not that you didn't have to sometimes protect yourself from him. If you didn't protect yourself from him, you were out of your God blessed mind, for God's sake. But on the other hand, if the only thing you did was protect yourself from him, you were going to miss a lot, And he redefined the entire thing of what your parents or school would have said, And I think that I agree with Terrance. That's both in the poems and in the man. I don't know how to separate those two. I would have a tough time separating because he is so solidly there, you know.
So solidly there in the poems. I think poets have a pretty long tradition of thinking that we can, I don't know, convince people of things. Giovanni Bernardoni, he thought if he went down and talked to the right people that he could end the Crusades. Back before he was Francis of Assisi. And I think that the poet that you could convert Robert Frost from meter into free verse with is Etheridge Knight. And and the way you do it is, Frost, the two most important things to Frost were the sentence sound, the way that the poet is able to trigger intonation in the mind, and drama. And, just the first two words of another poem for me, what now? I mean, just you see those words, just those two words, and there's just so much drama in that, they imply that, somebody is at their wits end with somebody else. It's just such a specific tone. So, speaking of tone, speaking to that dramatic element, Terrance talked about him as a storyteller in the poems. Passing the ball back.
You want to talk about that? It's so funny that you said the Frost thing. I never thought about that before because, of course, Robert Frost is also a really good storyteller. Robert Frost is also, I don't know how many people know this, like a little kind of a miserable motherfucker, like bad stuff happened around him. He could struggle to maintain some kind of decent happiness while he was being a poet. And again, I think that might be another interesting thing about whatever. So it's like, was Robert Frost like a white blues farmer poet? It's so great that you say that. I can just keep going, whatever analogies might come between the two of them. But more than that, more than sort of like, again, this language, it's more about like how they're translating the blues. Frost, I mean, too, like how they're translating the blues into their work is an interesting new idea for me. Whose woods are these? I think I know. His house is in the village, though. That's all storytelling. So yeah, it's cool. That's a good connection.
And so that tradition that Etheridge comes out of, the toast tradition, you talk a little bit about in the book, and I don't know if everybody listening here knows about the toast tradition that Etheridge came out of, and I was hoping you guys could speak to that.
I've got a couple of stories.
Let's hear him.
How he set me up one time with the whole toast thing. I got a position down at Little Rock, and he had set me up with this whole thing, and he says, "Well, all Black people know the toast tradition, and you can count on it. Blacks really know it, and they trust it." And so when I was going over to Little Rock, which was clearly divided whites against Blacks, and when I got in the first 2 days, I was only teaching white kids until I asked for some Black kids to be allowed to come in to the thing. And so they finally let some Black kids in, and all of the Black kids came in this one clump, and all of the white kids came in 2 by 2, male and female, or occasionally male and male, or something like that. But there was this whole group, sort of a Black kids sort of came in, and they were just intermingled. So I started reading some white poetry, and then all of a sudden I made a reference to toast, thinking that'll woo those guys. Nobody in the room knew what a fucking toast was, So then, but the only toast I knew was Dark Prophecy, I Sing of Shine. And of course, there's some words in there you're not supposed to say in high school, and because nobody knew about it, they asked me to read them one. So I did that. And I was told afterwards that I wasn't supposed to say pussy in the classroom. And the word fuck was also wrong, you know. So, you know, but Etheridge set me up with that damn thing, you know. He was notorious for that kind of thing. And it was part of it was my own ignorance, but also part of it was his saying, well, everybody knows he, you know.
So did you ever hear him give a toast?
Oh, he used to do them off the cuff, any number of toasts. The only one that I know that's really in his books is Dark Prophecy, you know, but he used to be able to rattle toast after toast after toast. You know, when I drive him around New England to give readings, etc., and when he moved up to New England, you know, I bet you about a third of the time we were in the car, he'd be reciting toasts to me.
I don't think though, you know, being from South Carolina, I haven't heard of them as toast either. I don't think I would have known what they were, but I knew what the dozens were, you know, and I knew, you know, the mama jokes, and even Shine is sort of like independent, you know, as a kind of story of itself. So it's interesting, like who decided they were toast or how much he sort of understood that as the layman's term for it. But yeah, those kids would have known something, you know, of it. I mean, that you know, I don't think kids know, you know, Shine or Dolomite stories anymore. We read more all of that kind of like oral tradition, but there's still something of it though that's like in kids rapping, talking about each other. There's still something of the toast in there.
So the toast centers on an individual. Is that the something that you find in most of them?
Again, I'm sort of saying like maybe in other regions people call it that. I just think it's sort of a way of interacting. Some people call it like a signifying monkey. There's all these kinds of like things that get grouped under that. But like people will know if somebody knows, you know, the Shine, it's a rap, essentially a rhyme, you know, it's again, and the person that we know sort of mainstream for that is Dolomite. You know, Rudy Ray Moore is the person who popularized some of those. So you're still wondering, like, I don't know, where did these stories start? At what point do you hear certain kinds of stories? But yeah, so I don't think it's anything quite as I understand it in the South, it's not anything that's explicitly like formalized that way. And less so over time. But I think it's still there. It's just like the oral tradition, storytelling, you know, shit talking.
Yeah. Not only that, there was one time I remember I think we were in New Jersey someplace, and Etheridge started telling toasts, and a whole bunch of guys started joining in and telling them. And it was all in the oral tradition. I mean, they all had all of that stuff, you know. So in his group, there were a lot of people who seemed to know about it, but yeah, the next generation didn't quite get down to set me up proper, but that's okay. You know, the number of times he set me up is legend. You know, you don't have enough time for me to go through all of them. But,
all right, well, that's good. That's good. This is a good you know, next topic. There's a wonderful moment in To Float in a Space Between where we see Etheridge's sense of humor, and it's through the Mary Carr anecdote. And you know, where, you know, Bly has been discoursing soul this, soul that, and 20-year-old Mary Carr says, you know, bullshit, I don't think I have a soul. And then Etheridge just, you know, finds this hilarious in the book. So I was just wondering if you could speak to his sense of humor, what sort of things he found funny, you know, what kind of hijinks he kind of liked to stir up in the name of humor, anything along those lines.
You're talking to Fran, right? Who are you talking to? Fran. That was
Fran,
Fran's.
yeah.
is that who he's talking to? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've never done that.
Totally convinced he was talking to you, by the way, Terrance, but that's okay.
So look. The principle of the book is like, I cannot write a biography of Etheridge Knight, but I sure wish someone would. So it's just a poet doing what you're doing, you know what I mean? Like just speculating and wondering about these things. But if I did that kind of research, you know, it would have been a biography.
Yeah, it's it. But,
and what Fran said at the beginning is what I think, like my relationship with him is through the poems, even if I know like Eleanor and the circle of people, Fran was still here who carry those stories forward. Like my most faithful relationship is in his work. So when you say, what was his humor like? I'm like, let's pull out Feeling Fucked Up Again, you know? Yeah. So I'm saying like, it's there in the work. And that's the challenge. Like how many poets can get that kind of humor if you were lining up the 5 funniest poets, maybe Frank O'Hara's on that list, because it's hard, you know. So I think, you know, questions about his humor is kind of manifest in the way you find it in the work itself. That's all I got. So you see what I'm saying? Like, I know that there's more to be said about it. I would love to hear that story too. But for my part with those kinds of questions, I'm in the same position that you are, which is a fan of the work and tried to trace who he is through the work explicitly, because I didn't do the stuff that a real scholar would have done, which is like, you know, gone to Mississippi, interviewed Fran, interviewed a whole bunch of other people, as opposed to just hearing stories. I know Mary's story because she's a friend, you know what I mean? Like I knew that I didn't have the chops to really do like a biography, but I would hope that somebody will. He's got so many good stories. I would hope that somebody would read that book and really do a real book, is what I would say about my own work.
I don't think there is ever going to be a biography. All there is going to be stories, you know.
Or a movie, you know.
Because he made up.
I was with Spike Lee one time, he got so offended. And I was like, you know, because Spike Lee's not a great filmmaker. I mean, he's a great cinematographer, but he's a terrible storyteller. So I was like, you know, there's still quite a good number of stories about Black people that you could just, you know, Frederick Douglass, he looked irritated. But Etheridge Knight is on that list. Like, Wanda Coleman's on that list. Somebody just get a screenplay together. There's just such dynamic American stories, really. When you look around thinking about the stories that are out there about, you know, us, all of us. So I'm like, how can it not be this very unique story, this very unique person isn't better known? And so I'd take a biography, but I'd also take a movie for somebody.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's going to be closer to a novel than a biography.
Yeah. I think. Right, because you don't know anything. We don't know anything. You know, Yusuf is convinced that he never actually was in the military, which is like mind blowing. He's like, he was AWOL. All the paperwork about him. This is the stuff that kept me from doing a biography. Was burned down someplace, mysteriously was all lost. So there's no like official record of his time in the military. And Yusuf heard somewhere that maybe he wasn't. His sister Eunice said he never divorced Sonia. So I know things like feeling fucked up. He pretty much had a gig up. Maybe it was in Connecticut. He got on the plane. He had just got a call that she wanted to divorce. It was like last minute for him. So he pretty much had some drinks and wrote that poem in the air, essentially. He's just telling that story I saw once in a reading of him somewhere online. So again, that's interesting, but the poem itself is just so much more, right? And that's as it should be, like that's what's still living. So I trust that as much as I trust his crafty, we don't know what's true, we don't know the early divorce, was he in the military, like that's cool, that's good stuff for a movie. But for me, the poem is telling you like some of the ultimate truths, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah. And he's you know, he would tell stories left and right depending on what he needed, you know. And when he was using, he needed a lot and he'd do anything to get it. And but then that translated into when he wasn't using it, because he had this wacko sense of humor and sense of reality that was always reshuffling reality all over the place, you know. But you know, and his needs were really great a lot of time, you know, and sometimes his needs would take his better judgment, you know, and take it for a ride. You know,
I think the great shock for me, the thing that was sort of the most important about meeting Fran was, you know, that he suspected that Etheridge would be open to meeting some other poet. And, you know, that Fran invited me in that way. So it's sort of like, I just think about how poets take care of poets. Because in my memory, you know, for a long time, because of what I had halfway knew about him in my own education, I thought he was still in jail. So when Fran's like, come see him, I'm thinking he's going to take me to the prison. I'm going to meet him. You know, that's as little as I knew, but it's still like the core idea that like poets take care of poets, so that even if he's in prison, he's still a poet. And this person who's not is saying, I'm going to take you to meet him. There was just something about that gesture. And all of the stories about him, that's what Fran to me typifies. Like, not all of us get to the university, not all of us get our books published. I mean, not all of us win big prizes, but you see poets just kind of take care of each other. He's, again, just a top 5 stories like that. When you go, that's true for Bob Kaufman too. These poets who like, we're not all going to be able to put on a tie and teach even. We're not all going to be able to walk down the street without stumbling on our face, as he said. So I just sort of feel like it's just a good lesson about how poets take care of people. And it's just evidence. It's not a theory. It's just evidence for why we still get to talk about it. Because otherwise we wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of people maybe as talented as Etheridge that just don't get the same kind of help to be themselves. So, you know, we're looking at the people that keep them alive, really.
The one story I've never told you, Terrance, that I might as well tell right here in public was when I invited you up that time, Etheridge was in the Veterans Hospital, you know, and I knew he was in the Veterans Hospital. I also knew that I wasn't talking to the bastard because he had forged a whole bunch of my friends' checks. Now, I knew enough to give my checks away when he was anywhere around me. I would give all of my checks away because Etheridge would steal almost anything, you know. So, but they didn't, you know, so they got stung. So I was pissed at him for forging all of these checks on friends of mine, some of whom really didn't have money, you know. And he went in, and I wasn't talking with him at the time. But the thing that's sort of interesting is I can remember inviting you up and then thinking, that means they ain't going to have to talk to the bastard, you know, when I get to Indianapolis, because I
Did
was
you
only
talk to him because he was dead by the spring? Did you ever reconcile?
Oh yeah, yeah. The other person that I recommend to you, Chris Gilbert, he was
yeah,
the one
sure.
who came to Indianapolis and said, you got to give up your goddamn not talking to Etheridge. We got to go visit her, you know? And so Chris and I went together and I sulked, but eventually I got over it, you know? And Chris's attitude was, he has more information from parts of the world that you are never going to know about, but he is close to in on, you know?
Another amazing poet, Christopher Gilbert, let us not forget. That it seems tangential, but it's not. You know, Grey Wolf brought out another book he did. I edited that, I guess, but it's the same kind of thing. Like another amazing poet who you just sort of want to make sure people don't forget and make sure people keep reading if you want to find out where he is. But a totally wild poet who, you know, I didn't know about for a long time till you mentioned him to me. I was like, how is it that I not know? I who know who everybody is had not read Christopher Gilbert.
That was
very upset. But you brought him to me as usual. You would be the person who lead me to him. So yeah, another great poet.
But yeah, but what came to me today was I knew that I wasn't talking with him, and yet I invited you. And it didn't dawn on me until after I left North Carolina that time, that if you were going to take me up on it, I was going to have to talk to the bastard, you know? And so it just forced me into coming to grips with it. And then when you didn't come up, oh, that solved the problem. I didn't have to talk with him until Gilbert came and forced me over there with the situation, you know? But anyway, stories.
Yeah, you know, you can definitely put your butt in the mud, Fran, and that's I don't know. I'm glad though that was that I don't know. I'm glad that you had the opportunity to forgive him, and I'm sure it felt good. I mean, especially
I
look at
never
back
said
as,
forgive him.
I don't know. I mean, as we look at, you know, addiction through, you know, 21st century lenses and see it, you know, as you know, a disease and not a, you know, a kind of a constant moral failing. I don't know. I think you can be more and more happy in the fact that you that you know that you were able to forgive him. You know, Terrance, you make some really good points, and it's about looking for the poet in his poems. It almost seems so obvious, and you know, but as you were talking, you know, I was thinking about his peeing poem, and just what a funny and tender poem that poem is. And it takes place in Worcester, Massachusetts, in part.
Is that the one for Galway? Is it Galway in it, or is it dedicated to Galway?
I don't know. I want to look it up.
Yeah, it's towards the end. It's with Carl going for a pee. Carl is Charlene's son. I think that's the one you're referring to.
Yeah, and he's just peeing with a little kid and teaching him how the equipment changes over time. And I don't know. I think I think peeing is a subject that isn't written about nearly enough. But this particular poem, I don't know. It's one of my favorites. It is, but what are some favorites of yours that maybe haven't been mentioned? Fran and Terrance both.
Well, Hard Rock returns from the prison for the criminally insane. Cell Song. He Sees Through Stone. Freckled Face Gerald. That's just from the first part of the book. I haven't even looked down, So, and and the other way was just the way those poems enter the world, and there's any number of poets who I think is willing to go into the world and do sort of odd things about the world, but I don't know. Etheridge did something special.
Yeah, all of those poems. I was remembering something that I don't think I spelled out in the book about the idea of ancestry. Like when he's listing out who's dead, those numbers aren't right. Like maybe his dad is still alive and he's like, I've lost 2 fathers. There's something that's going on with his biography and with that poem itself. And I only bring that up because at this point, the poems that are most intriguing to me are usually the poems where I can figure out the lies or the misunderstandings and think about like how the poem still manages to work. So the biggest one that starts that is the For Langston Hughes poem, which in the poem, he's like, Langston Hughes wrote Strange Fruit, and now that these people did this thing, it's just a side note for something in the poem about like dealing with grief. And it's written, Langston Hughes died in the 60s. He died actually when Etheridge was still in prison. So it would make sense about some of the missed facts because Langston Hughes did not write Strange Fruit, you know what I mean? Nor did Lady Day. But he's sort of taken that and building it into the poem. So it just adds this whole other conversation about information and misinformation in poems, or how much you really need to know, or how much sometimes not knowing stuff. It just becomes these really interesting, for me, points of conversation, because they're all good, but if you've read them all a million times, at some point you start peeling off more like neurotic things in the poems. So that to me is really, he's again another poet who I can easily find stuff in the poems that are sort of like wrong and yet totally okay. I'm sure there are other poets, but he's just someone who I've read enough to be able to like locate that stuff. So it gets to be fun.
And the other thing I'd like to point out is we're talking about Etheridge and his lies in having just skirted out of the Trump era of a president who would tell us lies, and the difference between what he was doing, and what Etheridge was doing. I'm not sure I know how to define it, but we're right at the juxtaposition where those two worlds, cross. I don't think meet, but they cross over each other,
I do back to the thing about the relationship between somebody who's crafted and crafty. If you think of crafty being closer to like tricky or hustling, but also knowing that that's, it's part of our titles too. This idea, Trump has none of that, no kind of craftsmanship, really no craftiness either to me. So I do think maybe I should say that, like, he was really crafty. That's a better way for me to, it's a more generous way of me thinking about him. But you're right, I mean, he was a bullshitter, he was a liar. He did do, he hurt people because of the addiction. So I'm not dismissing any of that. But when it comes to like this notion of his bullshit, I just like, yeah, he was very crafty, There's something in that gives him a little bit more agency, I guess, even if it might not be 100% right. And I always think, I'm not saying, again, not this, the romantic part of it, is it all in the spirit of poetry? I'm not saying that, because I do think the thing about that Essential After Tonight book is it is kind of recycled from the book he did with Houghton Mifflin, Born of a Woman. So, you know, like how many books does he really have at the end of the day? He's got poems from prison, and most of the poems that we cite and we talk about are in that book. And I think Feeling Fucked Up is in the Belly Song, and Belly Song itself. But we're talking like two books. And I think after that, we can speculate on why he couldn't keep going into the 80s, like why he wasn't as productive. And this sort of romantic ideas about it was connected to prison. Like when he was in prison, he had to be clean, he had to be more focused. It's also true, you know, you just think about like stamina for all of us over periods. If he's really injured, you know, if he's dealing with other kinds of addictions, the kind of energy that it takes. And so for some people, it means like you have 3 kids. You know, he needed methadone. Other people have, you know, other reasons why you fall off over a period of time. And then the positive landing on that is to say, it just don't take that much. Like, are we writing books or are we writing poems? Like, we're grateful. So it's not a loss to say after Schneid didn't write 10 books, you know what I mean? Even if I know that they're large chapters, you know, the stories of him having a missing manuscript he left in New York. You ever heard that story, Fran? He had this whole book. Again, he probably made it up, so who knows? But if he's not writing and people are like, why aren't you writing? It's like, I have a whole manuscript, but I lost it. It was typed up and I was on the subway and then it vanished. That's one of the stories I heard before. It might be true, but I'm sort of suggesting like, at the end of the day, when you're just doing poems versus poetry or poems versus poet, like he's got more amazing poems in those few books than most people get over say 10 books. So it just ultimately is not that big of a deal, even if the other side of it is like, we know that some of this just came from pain. He was just sort of, by the time he got to the 70s, too distracted by various kinds of pain to kind of still be as prolific as he was when he was writing in the 60s and early 70s.
I remember Audre Lorde writing Etheridge a letter after he had asked for like $200 or something like this. And she says, I'll send you 50. You know, I only believe about a quarter of what you ever tell me.
That's good.
And I thought,
another good movie. Audre Lorde, where her movie at?
So, yeah. And she was a tough one to play with. The number of people who told me not to hang around with Etheridge, you know, the number of Black poets who told me not to hang around with Etheridge was sort of interesting, you know, but it was all part of it. It was one of the great moments of my life that I met the son of a bitch, and that he taught me immense amount. But was he trouble? Yeah.
Yeah. He read a lot out of your library. You told me back at Butler that he used to, you know, really, you know, like your book collection, as anybody who sees it does.
That's what you mean.
Yeah. Who were is that even now? I'm just like, you know, but when you know, who were some of the poets that he liked, and who were some of the poets he maybe didn't like as well? What didn't he like about poems that he didn't like? What did he like about poems that he did like?
Did he read other poems? Was he interested in anybody else's poems? Maybe he wasn't, you know. Also, kind of an interesting way of thinking about how one lives as a poet. Maybe a poet don't read shit except for their own poems. I mean, it's not out of the question. I know he taught, so I know that he had an awareness of other genres, but I'm also saying I'm sure there were stretches where he wasn't reading, and you sort of think, if he's not a poet, how does that manifest itself? Because I don't know that to say the same thing. Like, what was he reading? I mean, as I said, he ran with all these circles and he absorbed a lot of poetics inside of those circles. But, you know, another big thing for the book for me is like, what was he doing before prison? So you don't find really in conversations either, other than that he came from a fairly creative family. It's like he really wasn't a poet. So you sort of say like, well, when does a person become a poet? Are you born a poet? Can something happen to you that makes you a poet? I was looking at this other thing, the other day about Bill Withers, you know, who published his first record like 33. And I was watching the interview and he was like, oh, I wasn't really interested in music when I was growing up. I'm like, what does that mean? That's a sociopath, you know, but it's the thing, suddenly he starts singing at 33 and he's Bill Withers. So Etheridge is a story like that. Like he really didn't write poems. There's very little record of it other than him sort of hanging out in pool halls and things. But nobody said, oh yeah, we knew he was going to be a writer. And in fact, when he started out, this is one way to answer your question. He actually was writing fiction first. So he put a couple of short stories in Negro Digest, and now it's Jet Magazine. And I think he was just trying to figure out how to land. And then, you know, Dudley Randall, I don't know if he was already visiting a bunch of prisons, but eventually Dudley Randall and Gwendolyn Brooks went to visit him in prison and looked at some of his work. But again, if you just think about, like, I mean, I know a couple of people in prison, but if his poets come in, they're gonna pull out poems to show you. If it was some playwrights coming, he would have had plays pulled out to show him. It was essays, journalism, he wrote for the prison newspaper. So if you had sent some journalists in there, he'd be showing them that. Maybe we'd be talking about him in that regard. So I do think some of it was opportunity because of the way the idea of ancestry is. Like, I think Gwendolyn helped him with that poem. It was one of the first poems he ever really wrote. He said he thought the whole thing when he was in solitary confinement. But the arc of that poem, like, if that's where you start, and this is the Bill Withers thing I'm saying, like, come on, man, that's where you starting. So you don't know, like, if he was really absorbing Gwendolyn Brooks's energy. I kind of think probably in that poem, even if he didn't maintain that connection to the rest of his work. So I know he cared about her, and I would assume maybe Dudley too, who was publishing books. But again, I only know that because of, like, they showed up, they talked to him about the poem, and he mentioned that. He wasn't talking about him any kind of, like, what did he like about Gwendolyn Brooks's poem? I don't think I ever heard him say that. So that's all a lead into Fran telling us, because I do, I'm sure he was reading stuff, but I also think, I don't know if he was what he was reading.
The time that he stole, you know, a bunch of poems, you know, from a bunch of books from my place, and I went down the time I was going to Arkansas, and we stopped at his place in Tennessee, and so that was the time I introduced Etheridge to Elizabeth McKim, you know, so that's how the two of them got together. But anyways, I missed my plane, and I ended up taking the next plane down. Etheridge wanted to run a party for us, and I arrived late. They came out to the airport again, picked me up. I was back at the house, and I was exhausted. So I stayed there while they went off to get stuff for the party that night. And as I was looking at the top shelf of his books, I realized how many of those books I had lost. And then when I took them off the shelf, I ended up noticing they were my name inside of them, you know? And so I went outside, I got a beer carton and stuffed them into 2 boxes worth, and said, when they come back, we're going to the post office and you're mailing these back to me because they belong to me. And he says, I was just borrowing them, man. I was just borrowing them. And I said, borrow means you asked before. You didn't ask. You took them right out of the house. So from that point on, I frisked them, you know, but the fact of it was the range of books that he stole, you know, amazing range. And he had read a good percentage of them. So he read a whole bunch of Carl Jung because of Bly, and he read history books that he stole from me. He, you know, any number, but I know he read those books, you know, because he actually would quote from them every now and again. And then he had my autographed copy of Gwendolyn Brooks that he stole, you know, and I got that back.
I would have stolen that too. I would have stolen that too, Fran.
Huh?
I would have stolen that one too. Did you get it back? Maybe I still can steal it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's why you were invited into Indianapolis again. I'm watching you carefully. But
I'll take it. I'm gonna get it.
Yeah, so anyway. Oh well.
We're on the other side of 9 o'clock. So Matt, do you want to ask like one last question?
Oh, I don't know. Does anybody, do you have a question burning in mind?
No, this has been wonderful to hear. And this is really exciting. But
as you can see, this is not going to end. If you think it's going to end just because you guys shut off the goddamn situation, all you're doing is shutting us off.
No. I mean, it's
talking for eternity here.
Yeah, Jason lets down the illusion, and it's like the lights turning up in the bar.
I'm nervous because I'm getting weird messages from Zoom. Like Zoom is some things. I'm very worried that Zoom is actually going to like
We'll just get
drop.
wiped off. It's okay. It's okay.
Something's
That's one way to end it.
Other people are trying to zoom into the. I'll have to cut this out. Other people are trying to like log into the account. I guess that's an appropriate sort of moment to share.
Yeah, I mean, I had some, I don't know. I don't even want to wander down this corridor because we won't get back for a while. We'll leave it maybe to another day and another time. But this has been really fun. And you know, anything that either of you want to say kind of in close? Should somebody read an Etheridge poem? Give him the final word?
Yeah. And I'd let Terrance do that. The
He's
other
not gonna
thing
trick
is
me into
that,
doing it.
you know,
I have so much audio here. I could find him reading something.
I was thinking that we do the Terrance and Fran show regularly. We haven't even scratched the surface here. Anyways.
No, there should be there'll be a part two. And
Hard Rock, I got that rehabilitation. You know, this poem, it's just a joke essentially, where the doors keep opening. I think that's what that is. I got a funny poem and I got the Hard Rock poem right at my hands here. If you want to hear him read something. No choices, no preferences.
I'd listen to him read Hard Rock.
Yeah, I think Hard Rock.
I'd like to read you some of my own poems. The first one, Hard Rock returns to prison from the hospital for the criminal insane. Hard Rock was known not to take no shit from nobody, and he had the scars to prove it. Split purple lips, lumped ears, welts above his yellow eyes, and one long scar that cut across his temple and plowed through a thick canopy of kinky hair. The word was that Hard Rock wasn't a mean nigga anymore, that the doctors had bored a hole in his head, cut out part of his brain, and shot electricity through the rest. When they brought Hard Rock back, handcuffed and chained, he was turned loose like a freshly gelded stallion to try his new status. And we all waited and watched like Indians at a corral to see if the word was true. As we waited, we wrapped ourselves in the cloak of his exploits. Man, the last time it took 8 screws to put him in the hole. Yeah, remember when he smacked the captain with his dinner tray? He set the record for time in the hole, 67 straight days. Old Hard Rock, man, that's one crazy nigga. And then the jewel of a myth that Hard Rock had once bit a screw on the thumb and poisoned him with syphilitic spit. The testing came to see if Hard Rock was really tame. A hillbilly called him a black son of a bitch and didn't lose his teeth. A screw who knew Hard Rock from before shook him down and barked in his face, and Hard Rock did nothing, just grinned and looked silly, his eyes empty like knotholes in a fence. And even after we discovered that it took Hard Rock exactly 3 minutes to tell you his first name, we told ourselves that he had just wised up, was being cool, but we could not fool ourselves for long, and we turned away, our eyes on the ground, crushed. He had been our destroyer, the doer of things we dreamed of doing, but could not bring ourselves to do. The fears of years, like a biting whip, had cut grooves too deeply across our backs.
There you go. That's the man himself.
That's right. Best way to do it. Best way indeed.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for coming on and doing this. And you know, thank you for letting us know that we can find the chameleon's real colors in his poems. You know, that we can meet Etheridge and know him in his work. And so we'll do this again sometime, hopefully. And we can all be happy that, you know, a hell of a lot of people, more people know Etheridge, talk about Etheridge, read Etheridge now than did in 2005. I mean, it seemed like very few poets even knew who he was that I would speak to. And that's not the case now. And work like Terrance's, you know, only will, you know, help the man just, you know, stay in that excellent company that he's in.
Thanks, Matthew. I hope you
Yeah.
write poems, man. Y'all know Matthew's an amazing poet.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about it. They just think you're crazy. They don't know you're actually an amazing poet. Thanks, KGB. I hope y'all come back. Y'all, not that far from me. I miss being able to walk down there on Monday nights. So we'll know the world is right again when y'all open up.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for coming.
Okay, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.